The phone buzzed against the nightstand like a creature trying to claw its way out. I grabbed it at 11:30 p.m., and my daughter's voice, Julia, came through in a strangled whisper. "Papa, come get me." My heart hammered, but before I could ask where she was, another voice, older, colder, my world stood still. My name is Lorenzo Moretti. I have spent 34 years of my life listening to the heartbeat of gears and springs, building a luxury watchmaking empire from nothing.
But to my noble-in-law, Isabella Ricci, I was nothing more than a filthy grease monkey. She and her son, Matteo, wore that contempt like expensive perfume, a scent you can't see, but can certainly smell. The real shock came when Julia returned home, tremblingly recounting how she had heard Isabella insult her father's profession as filthy little things. Bitterly, she uttered those words while sipping fine wine in the very villa I had used my honor and assets to co-sign a €600,000 mortgage for as a wedding gift. They thought I was old, senile, and easily led. They thought a craftsman knew nothing about the law or dirty financial schemes. Their biggest mistake was mistaking my kindness for stupidity. Isabella wanted to seize the house, remove my daughter's name from all papers, and push her onto the street with nothing. But she forgot one thing. A master watchmaker knows how to dismantle every tiny part to find the flaw, and now I will dismantle her life, gear by gear, in the most silent and ruthless way. Stay tuned, because this play of punishment has only just begun. Workshop is never truly silent. It is a rhythmic, mechanical chorus, 1,000 tiny brass heartbeats pulsing in unison. To the untrained ear, it's just noise. To me, it's the sound of order. For 34 years, I, Lorenzo Moretti, have lived by that order. I built Moretti Orologeria from a damp one-room cellar in 1985 with nothing but €10,000 in hard-earned savings and a set of tweezers inherited from a grandfather who died with silver dust in his lungs. Today, my workshop sits in the heart of Florence, overlooking the Arno. My timepieces are sought after by collectors from Tokyo to New York. I've spent 65 years mastering the art of the tick, ensuring that every gear, every spring, and every jewel bearing sits in perfect harmony. I thought I understood how systems worked. I thought if you treated people with the same precision and care you gave a Patek Philippe, the world would remain in balance. I was wrong. The phone on my workbench didn't just ring at 11:30 p.m. It vibrated against the mahogany like a frantic insect trying to claw its way out of a trap. I grabbed it before the second vibration finished. My daughter's voice, Julia, came through in a whisper so jagged it felt like a serrated blade against my ear. "Papa, please, come get me now." My heart slammed against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm that no escapement could regulate. "Julia, where are you? Are you hurt?" There was a sound on the other end, the rustle of silk, the heavy thud of a door being kicked shut. Not a soft click, but a deliberate, violent finality. Then, the voice that had haunted my family's peace for 3 years cut in. It wasn't Julia. It was a voice older, colder, and drenched in a predatory kind of arrogance. Isabella Ricci. "She isn't going anywhere, Lorenzo," Isabella hissed. The venom in her tone was unmistakable. "Put the phone down and go back to your magnifying glass. You're out of your depth." The line went dead. I didn't think so. I didn't breathe. I was already pulling on my leather coat and grabbing my keys before my brain could process the insult. My name is Lorenzo Moretti, and I am a man of peace. But Isabella Ricci was about to learn that even the most delicate spring, when wound too tight, will eventually snap with enough force to draw blood. The drive to the Ricci estate was a blur of cobblestones and rain. 3 years ago, Julia had married Matteo Ricci. I had welcomed him with an open hand, despite the hollow feeling in my gut. Matteo was old money, or at least, his mother Isabella made sure everyone believed they were. She wore her status like a suffocating perfume. You couldn't see it, but it made it hard to breathe in the same room as her. From the very first Sunday dinner at their villa, Isabella had made it clear that a merchant of clocks was a smudge on the Ritchie family crest. She looked at my calloused hands as if they were covered in filth. She spoke of legacy and lineage, while I spoke of craft and hard work. What I didn't know that night, the phone rang at 11:30 p.m., was that Isabella hadn't just been insulting me. She had been methodically dismantling my daughter's life for the better part of a year. Her marriage, her sanity, and her future were being stripped for parts, and she was doing it inside a villa that I had personally co-signed a €600,000 mortgage on as a wedding gift. I arrived at the gates, my tires screaming. I didn't wait for the intercom. I knew the code. Julia had given it to me just in case. As I burst through the front doors, the opulence of the hallway felt like a mockery. I found them in the grand library. Julia was huddled in a velvet armchair, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Standing over her was Matteo, looking weak and agitated, and Isabella, who stood like a queen presiding over an execution. "Lorenzo," Isabella said, her voice dripping with mock surprise, "you look disheveled. Did you forget to wind yourself tonight?" "Papa." Julia started to rise, but Matteo put a hand on her shoulder. Not a comforting hand, a restraining one. "Stay seated, Julia," Matteo muttered, though he wouldn't look me in the eye. I ignored him and looked straight at Isabella. "My daughter called me. She asked me to take her home. Move aside." Isabella laughed, a sharp, performative sound that echoed off the marble walls. Home. This is her home, though, frankly, she treats it like a workshop. I had to hire a specialized crew to clean the kitchen last week because I refused to eat off surfaces she touched. But then, I suppose we shouldn't expect much more from someone raised among gears and springs. The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. Gears and springs. To her, my life's work was nothing more than mechanical scrap. "Matteo," I said, my voice dangerously level, "let her go." "It's not that simple." "Lorenzo," Matteo stammered. He looked at his mother for approval. "We're in the middle of restructuring. My mother has a guy at the bank. We're moving some funds into an escrow bridge account to refinance. If Julia leaves now, it complicates the signatures." It sounded like a lie. It tasted like a lie. In the world of horology, if a watch loses 5 minutes a day, you don't keep winding it. You take it apart to see which part is broken. "Julia, get your things," I said. "She stays." Isabella stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a terrifying greed. "She stays until the paperwork is finalized. You might be able to build a clock, old man, but you don't know the first thing about how real power works. You're soft. You've always been soft. You think money is something you earn with your hands. Money is something you take. Is that right?" I asked. I felt a cold, still sensation settle in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was the absolute certainty that comes when you finally see the flaw in a machine. Matteo deserves so much better than a girl whose dowry was funded by sawdust and oil. Isabella continued, her voice rising. "He is Ritchie. Within a year, she'll be a memory, and this house, and everything you put into it, will belong to the name that actually matters, not yours." I looked at Matteo. He didn't protest. He didn't defend his wife. He just stood there, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by a woman who viewed the world as a buffet and my family as the main course. "Papa, please," Julia whispered, her voice breaking the spell. "I want to go." I walked past Isabella. She tried to block my path, but I am a man who has spent 40 years moving heavy oak workbenches and iron lathes. I didn't hit her. I simply occupied the space she wanted to be in. She recoiled as if I were a plague bearer. I took Julia's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "We're leaving," I said to the room. "You'll regret this, Lorenzo." Isabella screamed as we walked toward the door. "You're a fool, a tired, greasy old fool. You have no idea what I've already sent in motion." I didn't turn back. I led Julia to the car, the rain washing the filth of that house off our skin. As we drove away, I looked at my daughter. She was broken, but she was safe, for now. But Isabella was right about one thing. I am an old man, and old men who spend their lives looking through magnifying glasses see things that others miss. She thought I was a harmless checkbook-writing father who didn't know a forensic audit from a fishing license. She thought my kindness was stupidity. As the lights of the Ritchie villa faded in the rearview mirror, I made a silent vow. Isabella Ritchie wanted to play with time. Fine. I would give her all the time in the world to watch her empire crumble. I would play the role of the soft, foolish craftsman she so despised. I would let her believe she had won. Because a master watchmaker knows the most important rule of all. It is the silent gears that do the most work. And I was about to start winding her downfall, one agonizingly slow turn at a time. The air in my workshop usually smells of cedar, machine oil, and the cold, metallic scent of brass. It is the smell of my life's work. But tonight, as I sat on my stool, the silence was suffocating. Across from me, on the same workbench where I had taught her how to set a balance wheel when she was 7, sat my daughter. Julia was no longer the vibrant woman who had walked down the aisle 3 years ago. She looked like a ghost haunting her own skin, her eyes hollowed out by a betrayal she was only beginning to name. She had come home, not for a visit, but for space, that polite modern word people use when their world is burning to the ground, and they need to find a patch of earth that isn't on fire. "Tell me everything, Julia," I said. My voice was like a low-frequency hum, the kind a clock makes before the heavy strike of the hour. "Don't leave out a single gear. I need to know why my daughter's heart is out of sync." She looked at her hands, hands that used to be steady, now trembling. "It was 3 weeks ago, Papa. A Tuesday. I came home early from the vineyard because of a migraine. The house was quiet, or so I thought, until I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. It was Isabella." She stopped, a sob catching in her throat like a broken tooth on a cog. She was sitting there, drinking my wine, the vintage you gave us for our anniversary, and she was talking to one of her friends from the country club. She didn't know I was in the hallway. "And what did she say?" I asked. I felt a coldness spreading from my fingertips to my chest. "She called this house a museum of bad taste," Julia whispered, her voice cracking. She told her friend that she had to hire a secret cleaning crew because she couldn't stand to eat off counters touched by someone bred in a workshop. And then she spoke about you. Julia looked up at me, tears spilling over. "She laughed, Papa." She said, "Honestly, the girl means well, but look where the money comes from. Bangrang Velocio, just grease and scrap metal. Lorenzo is nothing but a filthy grease monkey who got lucky. Matteo deserves a woman with blood as blue as ours, not the daughter of a man who spends his life squinting through a magnifying glass at dirt." The silence that followed was absolute. In my mind, I saw the villa, the sprawling estate in the Tuscan hills that I had co-signed a €600,000 mortgage on. I had put my name, my reputation, and my life savings on the line so that my daughter could have a foundation. And Isabella Ritchie was using that foundation as a stage to spit on my name. "I stood there for 20 minutes, Papa," Julia said, her voice turning from sorrow to a sharp, jagged anger. "I listened to her tell Matteo later that night that I was too soft to notice the changes in the bank accounts, and Matteo, he just stayed silent. He let her erase me in my own home. I didn't storm the Ritchie villa that night. I didn't call Matteo and scream. Anger is a volatile energy. If you don't contain it, it dissipates. I am a watchmaker. I know that power comes from tension, precisely applied." The next morning, I stepped into a glass-walled office in the heart of Florence. The sign on the door read Bianchi Forensic Auditing. Elena Bianchi was a woman who looked like she was carved out of flint. She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't offer me sympathy. She just held out her hand for the documents. "I need to know where the blood is leaking from." "Elena," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. "I co-signed the mortgage. I am a co-borrower. The bank told me the account is already 3 payments behind. Matteo told me it was just a cash flow issue, a temporary bridge. I think he's lying. Elena flipped through the pages with the speed of a professional dealer shuffling a deck of cards. Her eyes moved like scanners. Cash flow issues don't skip 3 payments on a €600,000 note, Lorenzo. Not when the husband owns a profitable vineyard. Find it, I said. Every cent, every hidden wire. I want to see the skeleton they've buried under the floorboards. 10 days later, Elena walked into my workshop. She didn't wait for me to finish the delicate hairspring I was adjusting. She set a black leather folder down on my workbench, right on top of my blueprints. "It's worse than you thought," she said. Her voice was flat, professional, and utterly devastating. "There is no escrow bridge account. There is no restructuring for a better rate. It's a slaughter, Lorenzo." I opened the folder. My eyes blurred for a second as I took in the numbers. "Matteo opened a joint account 11 months ago," Elena explained, pointing to a series of recurring transfers. "But Giulia's name isn't on it. Isabella's is. For nearly a year, Matteo has been siphoning off half of the vineyard's profits, money that should have been marital property. He's funneled a total of €85,000 into that secret account." I felt a roar in my ears. 85,000. That was money that should have been securing my daughter's future. "And here is the killing blow," Elena continued, flipping to a wire transfer receipt. 2 weeks ago, €55,000 was moved out of that joint account. It went to a real estate developer in Milan. It's a non-refundable deposit on a luxury penthouse apartment. "In whose name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Isabella Ricci," Elena said. "She's building herself a palace in the city, and she's using your daughter's marriage as the ATM to pay for it. The plan is clear, Lorenzo. They drain the assets, let the villa go into default, and once the divorce is triggered, Isabella has a safe haven in Milan, while Giulia is left with a collapsed credit score and a mountain of debt that you are legally obligated to pay." I sat back, the weight of the betrayal pressing into my lungs. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing time, they were stealing the decades of sweat and late nights I had put into my craft to give Giulia a head start. To them, I was just a grease monkey whose only purpose was to be bled dry. "There's one more thing," Elena said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I pulled the recordings from the security system Giulia set up in the villa's kitchen before she left. You need to hear this." She pressed play on her tablet. The audio was grainy but unmistakable. "He's really restructuring his estate, Matteo." Isabella's voice hissed through the speakers. "We need Giulia's name off that house paperwork before the old fool finds out about the Milan money. Lorenzo doesn't know a mortgage from a mitre saw. He's soft. He's spent too long looking at tiny gears to see the big picture. We'll have her out by the end of the year, and then that penthouse is ours." The recording ended with the clink of a wine glass, my wine. I stood up, my joints popping in the quiet room. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Arno River, the water shimmering like liquid gold under the Tuscan sun. Isabella Ricci thought I was soft. She thought because I dealt in millimeters and seconds, I couldn't handle the heavy machinery of a legal war. She was right about one thing. I do see the small things. I see the microscopic fractures in a gear that lead to a total system failure. I see the one loose screw that causes a clock to stop forever. "Lorenzo," Elena asked, "what do you want to do? I can have the lawyers draft the filing by Monday." "No," I said. I turned back to her, and for the first time in my life I felt a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was the smile of a hunter. A lawsuit is a loud, messy thing. Isabella loves the spotlight. If we sue her now, she'll play the victim. She'll hide the money. She'll drag my daughter through the mud for years. I picked up a heavy brass casing from my desk, a clock housing that had been in the Moretti family for generations. "Isabella thinks I'm a fool," I said. my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a death sentence. So, I'm going to give her exactly what she expects. I'm going to be the most confused, lum-cum, and soft old man she has ever met. I'm going to let her show me every single card in her hand because she thinks I'm too blind to read them. And then, Eleanor asked. And then, I said, looking at the €85,000 theft on the paper, I am going to dismantle her life with the same surgical precision I use on a grand complication watch. I'm going to wait for the perfect moment, her moment, and I'm going to strike so hard that she won't even hear the gear snap until her entire world is lying in pieces on the floor. I looked at the clock on the wall, 11:30 p.m., the same time Julia had called me. Isabella Ritchie wants to play with time. I whispered to the shadows of the workshop. Fine, let's see how she likes it when the clock starts ticking. For her. Precision is not just about how a gear fits into a plate. It is about how a man fits into a room. To dismantle a predatory machine like Isabella Ritchie, I didn't need a hammer. I needed to become a broken part, a glitch in the system that she would find too pathetic to fear. I spent 30 years perfecting the tick-tock of the world's finest watches, but for the next few weeks, I would master the art of the stumble. I began my performance on a Tuesday evening during one of those suffocating family reconciliations Isabella insisted upon at their villa. I didn't arrive in my usual pressed linen shirt. Instead, I wore an old work cardigan, intentionally stained with watch oil at the cuffs. I left a smudge of graphite on my temple and let my hair remain a wild, uncombed silver mess. Lorenzo, Isabella said, her voice a sharp blade wrapped in the finest Florentine silk as she greeted me in the grand foyer. She looked at my stained sleeve with a visceral, twitching disgust. I see you've brought the smell of the dungeon with you. Do they not have soap at the workshop anymore? I blinked slowly, letting my eyes wander aimlessly around the room. I cupped my hand behind my ear. What was that, Isabella? The bells. Yes, the Duomo bells were quite loud today. My ears haven't been right since the winter. She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. She turned to Matteo, who was standing behind her, looking like a scolded lapdog. You see, Matteo, this is the legacy you married into. A man who is literally vibrating apart. He's becoming as obsolete as the mechanical toys he tinkers with. At dinner, I was a masterpiece of incompetence. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the wine. My own wine, a vintage I had gifted them, and I spilled a few drops on the white damask cloth. I watched Isabella's jaw tighten, so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. I let my fork hover indecisively over my osso buco for minutes at a time, looking like a man who had forgotten how to chew. So, Lorenzo, Isabella began, leaning forward like a hawk eyeing a wounded rabbit. Matteo mentioned the refinancing. Since you're the benefactor on the villa's mortgage, we really need to move quickly on the paperwork. My contact at the bank says the market is volatile. We need to consolidate the deed. I looked at her with a vacant, foggy smile. Banking. Oh, Isabella, don't ask me about the numbers. Every time I look at a spreadsheet, it looks like a pile of tangled hairsprings to me. I just sign where the girl tells me to sign. Remember, my brain is full of oil and cogs. Isabella's eyes gleamed with a predatory triumph. She looked at Matteo and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. It was the look of a person who had already decided the game was won. To her, a man who couldn't track a conversation wasn't a threat. He was a resource to be harvested. He's a vegetable, Matteo. A dusty, oil-stained vegetable. Isabella's voice hissed through the speaker of my phone. I was sitting in my truck, parked 3 houses down from the Ritchie estate. 2 days earlier, I had asked Julia to leave her phone in the kitchen during a visit tucked inside a recipe book for bistecca alla Fiorentina. The screen was down, the microphone was up, and the recording app was pinging segments directly to my dashboard. But the mortgage, Mother. Matteo's voice came through, sounding strained. He still has to sign. If he figures out we're behind on the payments, he won't figure out a thing, Isabella snapped. The man can barely find his own mouth with a fork. I'll tell him it's a document to protect Julia's inheritance. He'll sign it with tears of gratitude in his eyes. Once his name is off that deed and we've moved the remaining equity into the Milan account, we trigger the divorce. Julia gets the freedom she's been crying for, and we get the penthouse. The old fool is too soft to even hire a lawyer. He'll be too busy counting his brass screws to notice his daughter is homeless. I sat in the dark cabin of my truck, my hands flat on the steering wheel. I felt a cold, crystalline certainty settle into my marrow. It wasn't anger, it was the feeling of a master watchmaker finally seeing the bent tooth in a gear. I knew exactly how to fix it. The following Friday, I returned to the villa for tea. I carried a weathered leather folder, the kind I used for my cabinetry, invoices and workshop blueprints, paperwork. Isabella had made clear was beneath her notice. "Isabella, dear," I said, stumbling slightly as I entered the sunroom. "My accountant, Elena. She's been pestering me. Says I need to restructure my assets for retirement. She gave me this proposal from the brokerage, something about consolidating the household debt at a 1% rate. I don't know. It's all Greek to me." I accidentally left a printed copy of it on the kitchen table during a visit, tucked inside a folder with my company's cabinetry invoices. The kind of paperwork Isabella had made clear was beneath her notice. I made sure to mention vaguely and unprompted that my accountant was helping me get my affairs in order for retirement, and that I might restructure some of my assets soon. Then I waited. I'd asked Emily, with her full knowledge and consent, to leave her phone recording on the kitchen counter during a visit. 2 days later, propped inside an open recipe book, a good excuse for it to be sitting out, screen down, microphone up. I sat in my truck outside, 3 houses down, with my own phone buzzing softly on the passenger seat every time the recording app pinged a new segment. 40 minutes in, it happened. Patricia's voice, unmistakable, came through the feed. "If he's really restructuring his estate, Matteo, we need Julia's name on that house paperwork changed before he finds out about the condo money. I don't want a whiff of this reaching whatever lawyer he's suddenly playing footsie with. The old fool doesn't know a mortgage from a mitre saw, but I'm not taking chances." I sat in that truck with my hand flat on the dashboard, steadying myself, and I felt something settle into place. Not anger anymore. Certainty. I returned to my workshop and sat in the dark. I picked up delicate tweezers and a microscopic screw. My hands were perfectly, terrifyingly steady. Isabella Ritchie thought I was a grease monkey. She thought my life's work was Vunvat. She thought that because I dealt in the small things, I couldn't understand the big ones. She was wrong. The smallest gear in a watch is often the one that holds the most tension. If that gear fails, the hands stop. The time ends. I looked at the transcript Elena had sent over, the confirmation that Isabella had already called the brokerage number on my fake document. She was biting. She was moving her stolen €85,000 into the protected account we had set up. She was walking right into the center of the escapement. "Tick," I whispered to the empty workshop. "Tock." The countdown to Julia's 35th birthday had begun, and on that night at Ritchie's precious country club, I was going to show Isabella exactly what happens when you try to break a machine built by a Moretti. I wasn't just going to take her money. I was going to take her dignity, her reputation, and her future. I was going to do it in front of everyone she ever tried to impress, and I was going to do it with the same quiet, deliberate care I used to set the heartbeat of a masterpiece. The old artisan's mask was on, and underneath it the gears were turning with a lethal, silent precision. The moonlight didn't just reflect off Lake Como. It seemed to dissolve into the water, turning the surface into a sheet of hammered silver. We were at the Villa d'Este, a place where the air itself felt expensive, thick with the scent of jasmine, aged brandy, and old inherited power. This was Isabella Ritchie's kingdom. She had chosen this backdrop for Julia's 35th birthday not out of love for my daughter, but because she wanted an audience for her final act of erasure. I sat at the long marble top table, surrounded by 30 of the most influential names in Lombardy. To them, I was curious at the end of the table. I wore a charcoal suit that cost more than their cars, but I played my part to perfection. I let my hand tremor slightly as I reached for my water. I kept my gaze low, occasionally squinting at the gold leaf menu as if the words were dancing away from me. I was the filthy grease monkey they had heard about, the man who spent his life squinting through a magnifying glass at dirt. Isabella was radiant in a gown of midnight blue, her neck draped in diamonds that sparkled like the teeth of a predator. She had spent the evening holding court, whispering to her bridge club friends while casting pitying glances toward Julia. My daughter sat next to me, her spine a rigid line of silent endurance. She knew the gears were turning. She just didn't know when the strike would happen. Matteo sat across from us, looking flush with wine and cowardice. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was too busy basking in the reflected glow of his mother's perceived victory. As the main course was cleared, the room fell into that expectant hush that precedes a performance. Isabella stood, her champagne flute catching the light. She didn't just raise the glass. She brandished it like a scepter. "Friends," she began, her voice a melodic purr that carried to every corner of the terrace. "We are here to celebrate Julia's 35th year. It is a milestone, a time for maturity. And I must say, I hope this coming year finally teaches her what it truly means to run a household of our standing." She paused, a sharp performative smile curving her lips. It was the same laugh Julia had heard in the kitchen weeks ago. "The way she was raised, bless Lorenzo's efforts, of course, isn't quite the way we do things in the Ritchie family," Isabella continued, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, cold glee. "In our world, we value lineage over labor. We value the gold, not the grease beneath the fingernails. It's a shame, really, that some people spend their whole lives building voon-vat little machines and never learn how to build a proper legacy." A few of her guests chuckled uncertainly. The air in the room grew heavy, the way it does when people smell blood in the water. Julia's hand found mine under the table. Her knuckles were white. I squeezed her hand once, a steady, mechanical pulse. Then I stood up. I didn't scrape my chair. I didn't shout. I stood with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a man who has spent 40 years balancing hairsprings thinner than a human eyelash. The confused old man mask didn't slip off. I took it off and laid it on the table. "Isabella," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a lead weight in a grandfather clock. "Since you've brought up how families do things, I think there's something this table should know about the Ritchie legacy you're so proud of." Isabella's smile didn't move, but the skin around her eyes tightened. "Lorenzo, please. You've had too much wine. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." 11 months ago, I continued, my voice level and cold as a winter morning in the Alps, you convinced your son to open a joint account without his wife's knowledge. You've routed €85,000 of their household income into that account. The murmurs at the table died instantly. The only sound was the rhythmic lapping of the lake against the stone quay. 55,000 of that money, I said, leaning forward just enough to catch the reflection of the candles in Isabella's wide, frozen eyes, went toward a non-refundable deposit on a luxury penthouse on Via Monte Napoleone in Milan. A penthouse in your name, Isabella. Not Julia's, not even Matteo's. This is a private family matter, Lorenzo. Isabella snapped, her knuckles going white around the stem of her glass. It stopped being private when you used my daughter's marriage as an ATM to fund your exit strategy, I replied. I looked at Matteo. And you, Matteo, You told me the mortgage was behind because of a cash flow issue. You told me it was a refinancing strategy. It wasn't. It was you draining your own future to buy your mother's silence. You have no proof of this. Isabella hissed, her voice cracking for the first time. You're an old man with a vivid imagination and oil on his brain. I nodded once toward the back of the room. Elena Bianchi rose from her seat. She wasn't wearing a cocktail dress. She wore a sharp navy power suit that looked like armor. She walked toward the head of the table, holding a slim leather folder. The guests parted for her like the Red Sea. Isabella Ritchie, Elena said, her voice like a gavel. She set the folder down directly on Isabella's dessert plate, right on top of a delicate panna cotta. Inside, you will find your own bank statements, the Milanese deposit receipts, and a full transcript of the conversation you had in your kitchen last Tuesday. You recorded me, Isabella screamed. She looked around the table, her face contorting into something ugly and unrecognizable. This is illegal. This is a violation. In Italy, recording a conversation you are a part of, or that takes place in a home you own, is perfectly admissible in a civil suit, Elena said mildly. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. I pressed play. The high-definition speakers of the villa carried Isabella's voice to every guest, every server, every witness. The old fool doesn't know a balance, spring from a bridge. The recording hissed. We need Julia's name off that house paperwork before he finds out about the Milan money. We'll have her out by the end of the year, and then that penthouse is ours. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. I heard you call me soft in my own driveway, Isabella, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a death sentence. You thought because I build things with my hands, I wouldn't have the stomach to take you apart. You thought my kindness was stupidity. You were wrong. Two men in plain clothes, who had been quietly seated near the entrance for the last hour, approached the table. They weren't police. They were private investigators Elena had hired to track the wire trail. They didn't make a scene. They simply served Isabella with the formal paperwork for a civil suit filed on Julia's behalf. The joint account is frozen as of 10 minutes ago, Elena informed the table. As is the deposit in Milan, pending a full review of financial coercion. Isabella stood there, her midnight blue gown suddenly looking like a shroud. She held the folder of her own undoing in front of 30 people who had, until 90 seconds ago, had thought she was the gracious queen of Lake Como. She looked at her friends, the bridge club, the socialites, and saw only mirrors reflecting her own disgrace. I picked up the champagne flute Isabella had raised for her toast. I didn't drink. I simply set it down on the linen cloth with deliberate, unhurried care, bass first, so it made a single, clean, final sound against the table. We're done pretending you're the standard this family measures itself against, I said. Julia, let's go. As we walked away from the table, the first whispers began to break out behind us, the sound of 30 legacies being rewritten in real time. Isabella Ritchie wanted to play with time. Fine. I had just given her the rest of her life to think about how she lost it all. The fallout of a mechanical failure is rarely instantaneous. In a grand complication watch, if a single tooth on the escapement wheel snaps, the hands might shudder for a few seconds before the entire system grinds into a hollow, agonizing silence. That was exactly what happened to the Ritchie family in the 6 weeks following the gala at Lake Como. The consequences moved with the cold, unyielding momentum of a landslide. Once the first domino fell at that dinner table, there was no stopping the weight of the truth. Elena Bianchi, my sharp-eyed auditor, didn't just freeze the bank accounts. She bled them dry of every legal loophole Isabella had tried to crawl through. Because the bank flagged the joint account for financial coercion, every wire transfer Isabella had made was scrutinized under a microscope. The luxury penthouse in Milan, It vanished like a mirage. The developer, a man who valued his reputation above all else, caught wind of the suspicious wire trails and the looming civil suit. He didn't want his brand tarnished by the stench of Isabella's greed. He backed out of the sale entirely, and because of a clause Isabella hadn't bothered to read in her arrogance, she lost her €55 deposit outright, non-refundable, gone. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to the social death. In Florence, reputation is the only currency that truly matters among the elite. Word of the clockmaker's revenge traveled through the country clubs and bridge circles faster than a forest fire. The very friends who had snickered at Isabella's grease monkey jokes now looked at her as if she were a plague bearer. Her membership at the club, sponsored by a woman who had witnessed her undoing at the gala, was not renewed. She was a ghost in her own city, haunted by the silence of phones that no longer rang. Then came the divorce. It happened 2 months later. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that for nearly a year, Matteo had chosen to be an accomplice in his mother's theft rather than a partner in his wife's life. I remember the night Giulia finally packed the last of her things from the villa. Matteo stood in the driveway, looking weak, his old money heritage stripped away to reveal a man who had never learned how to stand on his own 2 feet. "I didn't know the extent of it, Giulia," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I was just trying to protect our future." Giulia stopped, her hand on the car door. She looked at him with a pity that was far more cutting than anger. "You didn't protect our future, Matteo. You funded your mother's exit from it. You saw me struggling to keep our heads above water while you were siphoning the air out of the room. That's not a cash flow issue. That's a character failure." She didn't look back. She came home to the workshop, to the smell of oil and cedar, to a place where time was measured by honesty, not by how much you could steal when no one was looking. In late October, the Ritchie vineyard hit a wall. The Ritchie name had become toxic. A major wine distributor, hearing the whispers of family drama and financial instability through the grapevine, moved to cancel their contract for the autumn harvest. Matteo was staring at total bankruptcy. If that contract died, the vineyard died. I sat in my workshop that evening, looking at the ledger. I don't love Matteo Ricci. I will likely never forgive him for what he allowed to happen to my daughter. But I thought about the 15 workers who labored in those vineyards, the men and women who pruned the vines in the biting cold and harvested the grapes in the blistering Tuscan sun. They weren't old money. They didn't care about bridge clubs or cashmere cardigans. They had families to feed and rent to pay. I picked up the phone. I called the CEO of the distribution company, a man whose family watches I had serviced for 30 years. "Lorenzo," he said, sounding surprised. "I heard about the trouble with the Rickis. We're pulling out. It's too messy." "Don't pull out," I said, my voice steady. "The boy is weak, but the wine is good. And more importantly, there are 15 souls on that land who don't deserve to lose their livelihoods because Isabella Ricci forgot how to be a human being. I didn't do it for Matteo. I did it because I refused to let someone else's malice turn me into a monster." The contract was reinstated within 48 hours. That is the difference between power used to destroy and power used to preserve. The final act occurred on a Tuesday in November. A cold sideways rain was lashing against the windows of my home. A little after 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman standing on my porch without an umbrella. Her hair was matted to her forehead, and her expensive cream cardigan, the one she wore like armor, was soaked through, grey and heavy at the shoulders. She had a single, battered duffel bag at her feet. It was Isabella. The Queen of Lake Como was gone. In her place was a broken woman who had run out of options. I later learned her sister in Milan had kicked her out after 2 weeks of her incessant complaining and entitlement. She had nowhere left to go. "Lorenzo," she whispered. The polish was gone from her voice. It sounded like gravel. I have nothing. No one will take my calls. Just for a few nights, please. I'm cold. I stood in the doorway. The warm light from my hallway spilled out onto the wet porch, illuminating the rain shadows dancing between us. I felt the old instinct, the one that says you don't leave a person out in a storm. But then, I thought of Julia's face on the night of that 11:30 p.m. phone call. I thought of the filthy grease monkey comments. I thought of the systematic attempt to render my daughter homeless while they sipped my wine in a house I had guaranteed. I hope you find somewhere warm and safe tonight, Isabella, I said. My voice was gentle, the same way I'd once set down a champagne glass to end her reign. But it won't be here. You're really going to leave me in the rain? She gasped, a flash of her old indignation flickering for a second. After everything. Especially after everything, I replied. I am a kind man, Isabella. But kindness and stupidity are not the same thing. The moment you confused one for the other, you started writing this ending yourself. I closed the door. It wasn't a slam. It was a soft, deliberate click, the sound of a lock sliding into place. I walked back into the kitchen. Sophia was there, 2 mugs of steaming tea already on the table. She didn't ask who it was. She had heard the rain, and she had heard the silence that followed. You did the right thing, she said, sliding a mug toward me. I know, I said, sitting down. It didn't feel good, but it felt right. We sat there in the quiet of a house that finally felt entirely ours again. The clocks on the wall ticked in perfect, honest unison. If there is one thing this journey has taught me, it's this. The people who underestimate you are handing you the exact advantage you need. All you have to do is let them keep believing their own lies a little while longer. Never apologize for being soft or for working with your hands. Integrity isn't found in a bank account or a family crest. It's found in the precision of your actions and the loyalty you show to those you love. Protecting your family sometimes means staying quiet longer than feels comfortable, so that when you finally do speak, every word already has the proof to back it up. Thank you for walking this path with me and my daughter. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or pushed to the brink, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing these stories of quiet justice. I read every single comment you leave, so tell me, have you ever had to prove someone wrong by simply being yourself? Let's talk below. Until the next tick of the clock, stay sharp, stay kind, and stay true.
That girl is a runner, she was born to get away. Hear that two-tone humming, headed out to the highway. I should have